Also been group head and managing director at Fitch Ratings with a focus on global energy issues. So we also welcome you before the committee. I will ask that each of you try to keep your comments this morning to about 5 minutes or less. Your full statements will be included as part of the record. I will alert you to the fact that we are scheduled to have one, if not two votes commencing at 11 o'clock this morning. So my hope would be that we would be able to get the testimony from each of you, and if we need to take a short break to run and do votes, we will do so. But hopefully we'll be able to get all the comments in under that 11 o'clock time, and we'll be able to proceed. There's a lot that is before the committee this morning, and we want to give you every opportunity. So with that, Mr. Weiss, if you would like to lead off, welcome.
Chairman Murkowski, Ranking Member Cantwell, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting Treasury to participate in today's hearing. We welcome the opportunity to have a constructive dialogue with you and with your colleagues on this important and very urgent matter. The economic security and well-being of 3.5 million Americans living in the Commonwealth is at stake. I would also like to acknowledge our ongoing collaboration with Governor Garcia Padilla and Resident Commissioner Pierluisi, both of whom are here today. Through our daily contact with local leadership and frequent meetings with stakeholders in San Juan and Washington, I can tell you with total confidence that Puerto Rico's fiscal crisis is escalating and it is very real, and that without federal action, it could easily become a humanitarian crisis as well. Let me be clear, there is no substitute for legislative action. Administrative authorities are simply insufficient to put an end to the crisis. Without federal action, this crisis will escalate and result in further economic contraction, outmigration, and suffering of American citizens in Puerto Rico. In the very near future, Puerto Rico will face impossible choices among providing essential public services, delivering promised pension benefits, and making payments on its debt. Now, my written testimony describes the gravity of Puerto Rico's fiscal challenges, but I would like to highlight a few of the more salient facts. First, Puerto Rico's decline started before the U.S. financial crisis, but unlike the U.S. as a whole, the Commonwealth never recovered and remains in recession today. Second, these economic challenges have sparked the largest wave of outmigration from Puerto Rico since the 1950s, and that pace continues to accelerate. 84,000 Puerto Ricans left the island last year. Third, the Commonwealth has already run out of operating cash. Government services and debt payments have only continued because Puerto Rico is deploying unsustainable emergency liquidity actions, such as delaying tax refunds to its citizens and borrowing from workers' compensation funds. But even with these steps, the Commonwealth projects it still will completely exhaust its liquidity before year-end. Now, the strain created from these actions is already evident. The pensions are underfunded severely. Hospitals have reduced services. One has even closed. And invoices to small businesses are going unpaid. Against this backdrop, additional fiscal adjustment, while absolutely necessary, must be measured against its negative impact on Puerto Rico's economy and people. In our judgment, austerity alone is not a solution. Most fundamentally, the debt is unsustainable, and the market knows this, which is why Puerto Rico's debt has traded for some time between 30 and 70 cents on the dollar. Now, there is plenty of blame to go around for the mistakes of the past, but we must now focus on the path forward. The administration believes that federal actions executed alongside measures taken in the Commonwealth are now required to allow Puerto Rico to address its fiscal crisis and for the economy to return to growth. We are presenting these policies as principles to the committee and stand ready to work with you on specific legislation. There are 4 interrelated elements to our plan. First, Puerto Rico needs tools to comprehensively restructure its financial liabilities. Congress should pass legislation already introduced that provides Chapter 9 protection to Puerto Rico's municipalities and public corporations. But Congress should also authorize a broader legal framework that allows for a comprehensive restructuring of all of Puerto Rico's outstanding debt. Second, Congress should require that Puerto Rico implement strong fiscal governance and oversight as part of any comprehensive legislative package. The oversight should provide sufficient safeguards to ensure Puerto Rico adheres to its recovery plan and fully implements proposed reforms. But care must also be taken to structure fiscal oversight in a way that respects Puerto Rico's autonomy and unique heritage. Third, Congress must provide a long-term solution to Puerto Rico's inadequate Medicaid treatment to raise the standard of care. We should also remove the Medicaid cap and increase support through the federal Medicaid match. And finally, Congress must help Puerto Rico boost economic growth. The decade-long recession has taken its toll on Puerto Rico's finances, its economy, and its people. To break this vicious cycle and help those hardest hit, Congress should extend the Earned Income Tax Credit to citizens in Puerto Rico. The EITC is one of the strongest, most powerful policies for rewarding work and supporting economic growth. We look forward to a constructive, bipartisan dialogue to identify ways to execute the administration's proposals and provide Puerto Rico with the tools it needs to manage through this crisis and restore growth. You have kindly invited us today to discuss Puerto Rico's economy, debt, and options for Congress. We believe this discussion is timely and the issue must be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wise. Governor Padilla, your comments, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Murkowski, for your leadership and for holding this hearing. I appreciate our collaboration and look forward to a bipartisan solution to this crisis, working with Ranking Member Cantwell, member of the committee, Congress, the Treasury, and the Resident Commissioner of Puerto Rico. We are facing a crisis in Puerto Rico, a crisis decades in the making. We didn't create it, but we need to solve it. To address it, my administration has reduced expenses by 20% and increased revenues by other 20% in the last 3 years. Despite these efforts, by the end of this year, Puerto Rico may have to choose between paying its creditors and providing essential services to the island's 3.5 million American citizens. Police and fire protection, health care and social services are all in jeopardy. Puerto Rico is running out of cash and will soon exhaust the emergency measures we are using to keep the government operating. When faced with the prospect of either making payments on debt obligation or paying for essential services, Puerto Rico will have no choice but to default. With no bankruptcy options, creditors will sue, dragging us into complex and costly legal battles that will only aggravate the crisis. I urge you to read Dr. Ann Krieger's report, which reinforces this reality. Her debt sustainability study the first ever done by any administration in Puerto Rico, describes a vicious cycle of economic recession, public borrowing, and fiscal adjustment that began to accelerate in 2005 following congressional repeal of Section 936 of the Internal Revenue Code and the resulting downturn into our manufacturing base. From 2005 to 2012, Puerto Ricans shouldered the burden of a new sales tax, employees' layoffs, thousands, a surtax on real property, and other expenditures and revenue measures, while our debt burden near double from 39 billion to more than 70 billion. Upon taking office in 2013, I began to implement additional fiscal adjustment measures, reduced expenditures and frozen collective bargaining agreements, reform our largest pension fund from defined benefits to defined contribution, and increase revenues. Most notably, throughout attrition, we now have 66 public employees per 1,000 persons, lower than the U.S. average of 68, and have begun to reduce our debt, a historic first. Other action my administration has taken are detailed in my written testimony. However, independent experts tell us, and we agree, that even if we implement all of the measures in my working group's fiscal and economic growth plan, large financing gaps and unfunded pension obligation will persist. We have never asked Congress for a bailout, and we are not seeking one today. We ask for access to a legal framework to restructure our liabilities. We ask for fair treatment in Medicare and Medicaid funding, for reforms that stimulate labor force participation and job creation, such as the Earned Income Tax Credit. We ask for an exemption of Jones Acts like that of the United States Virgin Islands, our closest neighbors. Treasury's recommendations address many of my administration's requests and are essential step forward. Chairwoman, member of this committee, inaction is not an option. By moving forward on these measures now, you can help prevent the situation from getting worse. Your action will have a dramatic impact on the people of Puerto Rico and will have little or no effect on the serious national budget issues confronting Congress. Waiting will only allow the situation to grow worse, more expensive, and difficult for you to address down the road. Give us the tools, and we will finish the job. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Governor. Mr. Pierluisi, welcome.
Chairman Murkowski, Ranking Member Cantwell, and members of the committee. For Puerto Rico to overcome its challenges, leaders in San Juan and Washington, D.C. must take swift and serious steps. The main economic problem in Puerto Rico is lack of growth. This is the result of low private investment, which is due to the lack of investor confidence in the economic and fiscal policies of the Puerto Rico government. The territory government has an outdated economic model that relies on government-owned enterprises, tax preferences, and subsidies. The government must streamline operations, expand public-private partnerships, and empower the private sector. There are no silver bullets or shortcuts. Progress requires smart, steadfast work. The Puerto Rico government must break its entrenched spending habits, which have not adjusted to changing economic and demographic realities. Our government must be a better steward of funds received from taxpayers and lenders, accounting for every dollar it spends. The local tax system requires reform because it is complicated and unfair. Some taxpayers owe too little, while others owe too much. And the government does a poor job of collecting what it levies. With improved economic and fiscal policy, Puerto Rico can eliminate deficits and be better positioned to meet its obligations to creditors. In short, the Puerto Rico government must be transformed. We owe this to our constituents. No excuses. Let me turn to the federal government now. I am a proud American citizen, but I am also a Puerto Rican patriot. I have spoken forcefully about the need for the Puerto Rico government to chart a new path forward. The federal government should now speak with equal force about the need to correct its immoral and illogical policy towards Puerto Rico. Because Puerto Rico is a territory, it can be and is treated worse than the states under programs like Medicaid, Medicare, refundable tax credits, SSI, and Chapter 9 of the Bankruptcy Code. You cannot treat the people of Puerto Rico like second-class citizens and then profess to be surprised when we don't have a first-class economy. Nor can you claim to be shocked that in the last decade, over 300,000 island residents have relocated to the States in search of equal opportunity. This was easily foreseeable, but only if your eyes are open. I joined the Treasury Department, the National Economic Council, and HHS in urging Congress to enact a legislative package for Puerto Rico that contains provisions that give Puerto Rico more equitable treatment under spending and tax credit programs, and to grant Puerto Rico access to a fair and orderly legal process to restructure a meaningful portion of its debt. The package could also contain language authorizing Treasury to guarantee repayment of principal and interest on future Puerto Rico bonds. Puerto Rico is currently locked out of the capital markets, and this provision would ensure that the government has the cash necessary to meet its immediate obligations. Finally, the package could provide for enhanced federal oversight of the Puerto Rico government's financial management practices with the goal of helping the territory to budget, spend, and tax in more responsible and transparent fashion. I believe such assistance would be welcomed by citizens and creditors alike. While I am open to federal oversight, I oppose federal control. If Puerto Rico is better governed at the local level and receives fair treatment at the federal level, we can overcome our challenges. My constituents already endure the indignity of not being able to vote for their national leaders. Further eroding democracy in Puerto Rico is not the answer. Finally, let me address the fundamental problem from which nearly all of Puerto Rico's other problems emanate: our undemocratic and unequal political status. No senator would accept territory status for their constituents, and I do not accept it for mine. Puerto Rico's status is not an abstract or theoretical problem. It is a moral, social, and political wrong with the crushing practical consequences for the American citizens I represent. One day soon, my constituents, including hundreds of thousands of military veterans, will have the same rights and responsibilities as your constituents. In 2012, there was a local referendum in Puerto Rico, and voters rejected territory status and expressed the preference for statehood. In 2017, it is very likely that voters in the territory will confirm their desire for statehood in the first federally sponsored vote in our history. The government of Puerto Rico will then use all appropriate means to petition Congress to enact legislation making the territory a state. For Puerto Rico to prosper, it must be treated equally. And to be treated equally, it must become a state. Until then, there is much the Puerto Rico government and the federal government can do to help the territory. There has been enough discussion. It is time for action. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Marswatch, welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Murkowski, Ranking Member Canwell, and members of the United States Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. I thank you for the opportunity to appear today before this committee to discuss Puerto Rico's financial and economic challenges. Puerto Rico currently faces two distinct yet related crises. The first and most urgent arises out of the government's weak financial situation. The second is the product of the chronic stagnation of its economy over the last 10 years. Decades of fiscal and economic mismanagement have engendered an economy characterized by chronic primary deficits, high debt-to-GNP ratios, low employment levels in the formal economy, a large informal economy encompassing both legal and illegal activities, significant government corruption and predatory rent-seeking behavior in both the public and private sectors, substantial tax evasion, a hollow productive base, and high levels of private consumption and indebtedness, enabled by having access to a stronger currency than its economic fundamentals will warrant. In our opinion, the parallels with Greece are quite evident for all to see and none to misunderstand. Notwithstanding this dismal economic situation, the island managed to triple its public debt from $24 billion in 2000 to $72 billion in 2015. Indeed, during this period, Puerto Rico's public indebtedness grew at a compound annual rate of 7.6%, while its income, measured by GNP, grew at a nominal rate of only 3.6%. To be fair, for decades, the borrowed money was put to good use to finance the construction of public schools, hospitals, highways, and other essential infrastructure. The problem is that during the last 20 years or so, a large portion of the money borrowed by issuing long-term debt was used to finance budget deficits, operating expenses, and classic poor barrel spending. Given the magnitude and multiplicity of challenges faced by Puerto Rico, it should be obvious that there are no quick fixes to solve the island's fiscal and economic problems. Congress needs to implement a comprehensive program, remove some of the disadvantages imposed on Puerto Rico under the current political arrangement, and eliminate some long-standing inequitable and discriminatory policies. The current situation simply does not allow for piecemeal action by Washington. A wide-ranging plan is needed. In the short term, the most pressing issue is Puerto Rico's deteriorating liquidity situation. If the cash flow projections made by Conway McKenzie are accurate, Puerto Rico will not have enough cash on hand to meet all its obligations as soon as December of this year. In that event, in the absence of either one, access to an emergency liquidity facility, or two, forbearance from bondholders, the probability of a disorderly default is quite high, because the current administration has already stated its firm intention to keep essential government operations running, and Puerto Rico cannot avail itself under relief under Chapter 9 of the U.S. Bankruptcy Code. Given the short time window, the policy options at the federal level boil down to providing short-term financing to Puerto Rico to avoid a default, or enacting legislation extending the application of Chapter 9 to the island. Another significant problem on the fiscal side is the cost of the government health plan, which is one of the principal drivers of Puerto Rico's non-interest expenditures. Providing Puerto Rico equal treatment under federal health care programs, such as Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act, will provide the Commonwealth with some much-needed fiscal space and address a long-standing injustice inflicted on Puerto Ricans. For the truth of the matter is that Puerto Rican workers and employers pay the same payroll taxes as workers and employers in each of the 50 states of the mainland, yet benefits to Puerto Rico are unfairly rationed by federal legislation. On the economic growth side of the equation, we recommend extending the federal earned income tax credit to Puerto Rico. The federal EITC is the most effective anti-poverty program in the United States. It has been shown to promote savings, it helps poor families, it smooths out the effect of unexpected financial shocks, and builds a strong sense of future orientation among recipients. Extending this program to Puerto Rico, which would provide a significant wage supplement to low-income Puerto Rican working families, could be expected to stimulate aggregate demand in the short run. Sustaining economic growth over the long term, however, is a more complicated issue, involving the interplay of many factors and variables, including the capability to accumulate and increase capital in all its forms, physical, financial, and human, the efficiency with which inputs are utilized in the production process, what economists refer to as total factor productivity, the degree of openness to the world, and the institutions and adaptable institutional structures that provide the right incentives to innovate and develop new technologies to reorganize production in order to exploit new opportunities. In this context, we recommend We strongly recommend that any savings derived from a reduction in debt service be dedicated exclusively to develop and implement a new industrial policy for Puerto Rico based on a set of coherent horizontal policies, such as reforming a complicated permitting and licensing system that stifles innovation, lowering energy and other costs of doing businesses in the island, and substantially improving educational standards. Discovering new sectorial opportunities through a process of dialogue and consultation with key stakeholders in the private and civic spheres, and identifying spillovers, externalities, and other areas where Puerto Rican society could learn more. This new learning, in turn, would lead to new investment in research and development, increased productivity, identifying new areas of comparative advantage for Puerto Rican firms, higher economic growth, and the creation of high-quality jobs, which is what will, in the end, categorically terminate Puerto Rico's economic stagnation. We at the Center for a New Economy are currently working with experts from Columbia, Brown, MIT, and Brookings, among other institutions, to develop this medium to long-term industrial policy. Finally, any new economic strategy for Puerto Rico, no matter how nuanced, sophisticated, or brilliantly conceived, is bound to fail if it ignores the fact that Puerto Rico has reached the limits of its development within the constraints imposed by its subordinate political status, which is both humiliating to Puerto Ricans and unworthy of a nation like the United States. In conclusion, Chairman Murkowski, I thank you and the committee for once again participating in this important policy debate and look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Marswatch. Mr. Feder, welcome.
Thank you. Chairman Murkowski, Ranking Member Cantwell, and members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify on the fiscal issues affecting the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. With my background as a utility regulator and utility bond rater, I've been asked to discuss Puerto Rico's electric utility known as PREPA. I should say, with the comments from my colleagues on the panel, the fiscal issues are extremely serious, but I believe, at least on the energy side, with a few changes, it potentially has a brighter outlook, including the possibility of a consensual settlement agreement with investors short of a filing for bankruptcy. Initially, I wish to emphasize that I come at the PREPA issues with the hope that the ultimate resolution will create an environment in which investors will be willing to continue providing funds to the Commonwealth for the wide range of public services they now support, and that goes on well into the future. I believe the best way of achieving that is if stakeholders can reach a consensual settlement agreement under which necessary sacrifices can be shared across the board. This is consistent with the approach I took at the Michigan Commission, where I continually urged our staff and adversarial parties to attempt to reach agreement on points of difference through settlement, because no matter how thorough a litigated case record is developed, the parties are always in a better position to weigh their areas of dispute and strike a fair balance as to how they wish them to be resolved. Basically, then, each party chooses the end result for themselves. Towards this ultimate goal, I offer the following thoughts. The new Energy Commission should expedite PREPA's current base rate case as much as it possibly can, a point that I believe Congress could help emphasize. My understanding is that rate levels have long been inadequate to meet operating expenses and debt obligations, thus leading to PREPA's financial crisis. Adding to the problem, when oil-reliant PREPA received a major positive break with oil prices plummeting down during the past year, those saved funds were immediately flowed back to customers rather than keeping rate levels the same and using the additional revenues to support operations and required investor payments. My back-of-the-envelope calculation puts those lost revenues during the past year as approaching $1 billion on a total base of $9 billion of debt at PREPA. I admit I'm not sure if the Energy Commission had the authority to so direct these fuel savings, but my experience tells me that they could have done what I did at the Michigan Commission. I went to the Michigan legislature. Actually, your colleague, Senator Stabenow, was serving in the legislature at that time. I explained to policymakers why the law needed to be changed and why the public interest would be furthered if they did it immediately. Such a proactive step would have helped PREPA respect the interests of debt investors while mitigating the financial pain its customers will likely have to face as this crisis proceeds. Similarly, PREPA should immediately endeavor to operate with substantially increased efficiencies, especially with regard to rate collection practices. I think if I were serving at the Commission or at PREPA, I would seek the advice of individuals and institutions that have faced similar difficulties in the past. For example, almost every U.S. utility regulator serves at NARUC, their long-standing national association, and utility executives belong to a range of electric and natural gas associations. I expect that any of these organizations would be willing to assist PREPA or the Energy Commission. And of course, relevant experience exists in utility consulting firms across the U.S. Expertise is there to be tapped, and I believe Congress could play a role in facilitating a connection between PREPA, the Commission, and these experts. In addition, I understand that outside investors are willing to assist PREPA in a range of ways, from new investment aimed at asset modernization all the way up to privatization. At this point, no option should be off the table. Finally, let me briefly discuss the potential for Chapter 9 bankruptcy filings being permitted for PREPA or other Commonwealth entities. At least with regard to the energy sector, the potential for a Chapter 9 filing was not a risk that investors considered at the time they decided they would lend money to PREPA. Undoubtedly, that means that if Chapter 9 were permitted for review of debt investors' return of funds, there'd be legal challenges to such an authorization that would go on for years. I think a consensual settlement agreement is potentially there and would be a far superior path. Finally, let me tell you just my concern about the Chapter 9. Debt investors lent money to the Commonwealth and its public agencies with the expectation that they would receive their funds back with interest. They are not equity holders or co-owners of PREPA, subject to the ups and downs of utility performance. Thus, in my mind, for any resolution of this crisis to succeed going forward, it must keep faith with the debt investment community, because those are the individuals
hope for. There have been a number of financial reports. You mentioned one, and several of you also mentioned the Krieger report. There's also the Conway-McKenzie report to the working group report, which I think is helpful. But there is concern, clearly, about the verifiability of Puerto Rico's financial data, and this goes back to the fact that we haven't seen a comprehensive independent audit since July of 2013, and I know that this was an issue that was raised before the Finance Committee as well. Can you tell the committee this morning whether or not there are plans to complete independent audits of the Government Development Bank for fiscal years 2014 and 15, and then, of course, going into the future? Where is the status of that?
Thank you, Chairwoman. It's a historical problem in Puerto Rico. We inherited a mess there too, and it was part of the different governments in the past to hide information to the market so they were able to have more access to the market. We have been dealing with that. Now we are just one audited financial statement behind that should be released in next weeks or months.
Excuse me, would that be 14 or 15? That
Will be 14 and then 15, but when I was sworn in, the delay was huge. We have been able to go for and being now a little bit more accurate. Conway McKenzie and Krieger report are part of that effort of the Commonwealth and my administration to bring you and to the world the right numbers about Puerto Rico through commission independent experts to evaluate Puerto Rico numbers. So on the audited financial statement is a historical problem that we are just now putting up to date, but to supplement that lack of information, that's why we commissioned the same company that did the research in Detroit, that is Conway and McKenzie, and best one in the world from the IMF is the Krieger report.
But what you're telling the committee is we should anticipate the 2014 independent audit sometime within the next several weeks.
Weeks or month, yes. I will tell you why. As you know, it's an independent contractor that is requesting everyday information. So to put a burden on them to be faster, I need to ask them to address the issue in a more responsible way so you will have the better numbers. But yes, we are putting a lot of pressure on them to accelerate that process.
I think you understand the need and, of course, the concern for very clear numbers. Let me ask you, Mr. Weiss, given your close interaction with the Puerto Rico government over the last year, are you comfortable with the financial data that is available, and has the Treasury Department considered sending a team from Treasury to help them produce some of these auditable financial statements?
Well, thank you for posing the question, Chairman Murkowski. An essential part of the plan that we are proposing, not covered in my oral testimony but contained in the written proposal, is that it is absolutely the case that Puerto Rico needs to make an investment in its financial reporting systems and cannot be in a position where audited financials are not released on a timely and transparent basis to all stakeholders. It is equally the case that we have analyzed all available data, including the Conway-McKenzie report and other analyses, and there can be no doubt in our judgment that there is a fiscal crisis and that it is imminent. It is a liquidity crisis as well as a long-run fiscal crisis, and this is why we have proposed not just a broader restructuring authority, but also enhanced fiscal oversight, and as part of that fiscal oversight, an investment in IT infrastructure, and also the authorizations, as you suggest, to allow Treasury and the other agencies within the federal administration to provide real on-the-ground technical assistance to make sure that that IT infrastructure is built out quickly and effectively.
So that technical assistance that you're speaking to will be a team from Treasury that will go to Puerto Rico to try to get a better handle on what we're talking about with the numbers. And the reason I ask, you mentioned assisting with a system. You and I both know that that's going to cost money. You and I both know that there's a lot of uncertainty right now in terms of what is going on with just the budget and appropriations as we move forward. As we look at the proposals that you have outlined, one of the concerns that has been expressed is that there doesn't appear to be any kind of an estimate as to what the overall cost may be, whether it is for the proposals that have been discussed with the EITC, removing the Medicaid cap, or as you have just mentioned, assistance with helping build out what is very necessary, I would agree. But do we have any kind of an estimate out there in terms of the cost of the administration's proposals?
As to the cost of the build-out of the IT infrastructure, it's our judgment that the cost is low, but that the benefits are great, and that, in fact, the technical assistance we could provide, not just out of Treasury, but other agencies, would help to ensure that it is effective and quickly implemented. But I need to underline that there can be no doubt that there is a fiscal and liquidity crisis in Puerto Rico. The debt is consuming $3.5 to $4 billion annually out of a $10 billion budget. That is 35 to 40% of government receipts. This compares to figures more in the area of 5 to 10% in states and municipalities. The debt trades at prices between 30 cents and 70 cents and has traded there for the past 2 years since Puerto Rico lost access to traditional municipal bond investors. So the investment needs to be made, but it cannot be an excuse in our judgment for a failure to act.
Okay, Mr. Weiss, I'm well out of time, but know that I'm going to come back to you with this question in the next round to try to understand what it is that we're dealing with, because as I would agree, we have to work with Puerto Rico here. We must address this. We also recognize that we have issues as they relate to just dealing with the costs. And so I'm trying to get some kind of an understanding as to what we're dealing with the administration's proposal and to whether or not they've got a back of an envelope number that we can be looking to. So know that I'm going to be coming back to you. Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panelists. I think having seen some of the discussion in the Finance Committee at the end, it got kind of heated. I think it's safe to say that you all don't hang out together. So if I could just get an answer to this question, a yes or no, which of you support this Chapter 9 authority, creating Chapter 9 authority for Puerto Rico?
Yes.
Can we just go down the line?
I'm sorry.
Mr. Weiss?
Yes, Senator.
Yes.
I support Chapter 9, giving access to Puerto Rico to Chapter 9. I introduced a bill for that purpose.
Yes, Senator, I support it.
No, I do not.
Okay. And Mr. Fetter, your testimony suggests that you believe that there are assets within the utility, and that's why you don't support Chapter 9, and you want to make sure that those assets, but in a bankruptcy, that is what the bankruptcy discussion is about what assets are there. So, Mr. Wise, why, is Puerto Rico, our governor, going to be constrained, all the other sectors of trying to do reform in bankruptcy going to be constrained by this utility objection?
We need to be clear about bankruptcy as a whole. There are two aspects. One is Chapter 9, which has been introduced by Congressman Pierluisi in the House, and there is a companion bill in the Senate, and that would cover PREPA and the other public corporations and municipalities. That totals approximately 1/3 of the total bonded debt in Puerto Rico. The administration is absolutely in favor of moving forward with that legislation immediately. It would help not only finalize the PREPA negotiations, which are ongoing, but also cover the other municipalities in Puerto Rico which are over-indebted. At the same time, we are advocating for a broader bankruptcy that would cover the entire bonded debt of Puerto Rico. And the benefits of that are, first, litigation has been made. Various have mentioned litigation. It provides a stay on litigation and necessary breathing space for the economy while it is in effect. Second, it provides a mechanism for assuring an agreement with each class of bondholders that is enforceable across the entire debt stock. And third, to the extent needed, it allows for senior financing, which can be brought in from the private sector and come out on a priority basis. It's our judgment that the time has come to address the entire debt stock of Puerto Rico and not just the Chapter 9 municipalities and public corporations.
Mr. Fetter, you're definitely holding the utility area sacrosanct under this larger problem. And so what about what Mr. Weiss just said is not a process and procedure for making sure that this is
Senator,
that your investors are going to have a fair day in a horrible situation, no doubt, but they are going to have their fair day under this.
Well, I guess I come at it a few different ways. It's a risk that they did not envision when they decided to make their investment. I believe with a commitment towards improved operations at PREPA and improved regulatory timeliness, a consensual settlement agreement can be reached. And so that, to me, that's far superior than starting down a path of Chapter 9 restructuring, which in the end might be okay to investors or it might not be okay. So since it's that binary okay or not, my expectation is that they would raise legal objections at the outset as opposed to working towards that settlement agreement that I think is possible.
Mr. Marcia?
I just want to make a quick remark. I disagree. I respectfully disagree with the remark that bondholders relied expressly on bankruptcy protection in order to make these investments. To my knowledge, looking at every prospectus that's out there, I don't think it was even highlighted, when the debt was issued. The main driver for Puerto Rican bonds was the triple tax exemption they enjoyed under the U.S. tax code and in Puerto Rico. And that was really what drove people to invest in Puerto Rico. It will be very difficult, I think, for any investor to prove in a court that they relied expressly on a representation that bankruptcy was not an option.
Okay, I see my time has expired. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. Senator Barrasso.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Congressman Pierluisi, you mentioned in your written testimony Puerto Rico is, I think you said, quote, treated in discriminatory fashion or excluded entirely from various federal programs, including Chapter 9 of the Federal Bankruptcy Code. And as you know, there's a companion legislative proposal to your bill in the Senate introduced by Senator Blumenthal to grant Chapter 9 Bankruptcy Code protection. I have concerns about families and retirees in my state and other states who were incentivized by Congress through the tax code to invest in Puerto Rican bonds, including the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority. I've heard there are many individuals who are invested in these bonds across the state of Wyoming, sometimes investments in their 401ks, people who may not even know that their 401ks invested in these bonds. Congress explicitly prohibited Puerto Rico from being able to access Chapter 9. Puerto Rico took advantage of the lower cost of capital by doing that. If access to Chapter 9 were granted and the rules under which investments in these bonds were made are retroactively changed, then the value would, I think, be negatively impacted. So my concern is people bought the bonds because they're tax-free, low-interest government bonds. So what happens when a retiree in Wyoming goes to their mailbox, opens their financial statement, only to find their investment has been negatively impacted because Congress changed the rules of the game after the fact? What do I tell them?
Okay, first of all, Congress has the power to change the bankruptcy laws at any time. And no lawyer worth his or her salt would advise a client that bankruptcy law cannot change. Puerto Rico for 45 years had access to Chapter 9. It didn't use it then, it didn't need it then. For reasons that are not even expressed in the congressional record, it was left out. Well, that's the story, the life of a territory. But I would also add that any investor would be in worse shape if, for any reason, the entity in which the investor invests has no legal structure, no legal remedy to handle its debt obligations. That's the situation in Puerto Rico right now. This is going to end, it's going to end up being chaos. You need a legal framework in which a bankruptcy court, a federal bankruptcy court, oversees the reorganization of an entity that becomes insolvent. By the way, this is not like automatic. The law is clear. You need to show that you're insolvent. You need to show that you're not able to pay your debts when they become due. In addition, creditors have a participation in the process. So if anything, I say, it's much better to have Chapter 9 than not. And all we're asking is the same access as the states have. That's my answer.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. In if this Chapter 9 status is granted, wouldn't that cost Puerto Rico the confidence of investors in the future who are a key component of improving the economy of Puerto Rico?
Senator, thank you for the question, and it really leads to the point that Puerto Rico lost confidence of traditional investors 2 years ago when it lost its investment grade rating. And the only financing it's been able to complete since then has been one $3.5 billion financing at an 8.5% rate, which was put together entirely by hedge funds. More recently, it's also lost its interim financing. It's in a completely shut out situation from financial markets today.
So would granting Chapter 9 do anything to address the structural problems and practices that have led to the economic situation in Puerto Rico?
As we have said in our proposal, the Chapter 9, the broader version, which covers the entire debt stock of Puerto Rico, in our judgment, should be coupled with greater fiscal oversight provided by a body that appropriately represents the status and people of the Commonwealth, and investment in IT infrastructure around financial reporting. So we would do the two together. But we think the quickest way to restore confidence in Puerto Rico and financial markets is to go through a broader, comprehensive restructuring of the Commonwealth's debt, such that it emerges in a position where investors have confidence in oversight in IT systems, and that the level of debt itself, which today is totally unsustainable, better matches the size of the economy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barroso. For the information of the committee members, a vote has just started. There will be 2 votes. So I think what we will do is we will go we'll go until 25 after, and then we'll take a break. That way we can try to hit both votes at one time and then come back. So that, at this time, we'll go to Senator Heinrich.
Commissioner Pierluisi, Mr. Fetter seemed to suggest that PREPA rates are not adequate, and that may be true from at least the narrow view of some investors. But as you know, PREPA rates are already far higher than mainland electric rates. If electric rates were higher in Puerto Rico, how would that impact the broader ability to attract additional business investment that's needed to grow out of the current situation?
Excellent question. But of course, that PREPA and our energy cost is crucial to Puerto Rico's future. We need to grow. We need to grow our economy. And we're paying over 20 cents per kilowatt hour for energy. PREPA needs to diversify its energy sources. To do so, it needs to attract private capital, so we have new LNG plants in Puerto Rico. But in the current state of affairs in PREPA, it has become such a risk for the investment community that nobody would enter into a power purchase agreement with PREPA as matters are. That's why restructuring PREPA, reorganizing PREPA under the protection of the bankruptcy court should be an option. I am the first one, Senator, who support consensual negotiations with creditors. PREPA has been doing that for more than a year. I have been saying that it has taken too long. But we should always have that option because it is good for the process. It encourages the parties to negotiate in good faith. It gives PREPA, yes, more leverage in the negotiation, but it's the right thing to do. And of course, the solution cannot be raise rates. That cannot be the solution. That's going to harm our economy, and it's going to cause even more migration, and it's going to create more fiscal pressure. So you're absolutely right.
And so with regard to Chapter 9, you believe that the certainty that that creates in the long run is better for the investment community than the status quo, obviously?
Yes, definitely. It is a tool we should have. I should say that in Puerto Rico, I believe we have 18 different entities issuing bonds in Puerto Rico. Some of those entities are in reasonable financial condition. Some definitely need to be reorganized. PREPA is one. The Water and Sewer Authority is probably the next candidate. And we should have this tool. We should definitely have this tool. Now, part of our debt, and I should make this point, it has been issued by the central government and has been guaranteed by our Constitution. And Congress approved our Constitution. I believe that that part of the debt, which is about $18 billion worth, is manageable. And we should pay every penny of it because it is our word. It is our constitution. And we should be a jurisdiction of law and order. So I want to clarify the record there. Even though I agree with having Chapter 9, I do not agree with the concept of restructuring or failing to pay all of our debt. We should honor our obligations to the extent we can, and we should have Chapter 9 available.
Do you think there's any a relationship between the uncertainty over Puerto Rico's political status to the current economic crisis? What is the nexus there, Commissioner?
A clear nexus. Just let me give you just an example. And by the way, Chairman, you referred to the lack of estimates. Obviously, to the extent we start generating specific bills, we'll score them. CBO will score them. But let me just give you one example. If you improve the treatment of Puerto Rico under the Medicaid program, so that at least we can cover the people falling below the federal poverty level. I'm not even asking for Medicaid expansion. The Puerto Rico government would be receiving, at the very least, roughly about $1.5 billion from the federal government that is not receiving right now. That accomplishes two things. On the one hand, it helps us fiscally. We wouldn't have the deficits that we're having. We wouldn't have the liquidity problems we're having. On the other hand, we could cover this population, American citizens, under the poverty level as we should. So that's just one example. That's why this is tied to status. Why are we treated like that? Because we're a territory and you have license to treat us differently. But I complain because as American citizens, we should be treated equally. And it has an impact on our fiscal health, and it definitely has an impact on our economy.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
May I add something about it?
We're going to go to Senator Sanders, just because we're running short of time here. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to raise a couple of issues. First of all, let us be clear about the extent of the human tragedy currently taking place in Puerto Rico. As I understand it, since 2006, Puerto Rico has lost 20% of its jobs. About 60% of Puerto Rico's adult population are either unemployed or have given up looking for work. Over the last 5 years alone, more than 150 public schools have been shut down, and the childhood poverty rate has shot up to 56%. That is a human tragedy. And in my view, Wall Street should not be believing that they can get blood from a stone. When people are suffering and hurting, you cannot continue to squeeze them. And I want to get back to that, but I want to say a word now on the energy situation. I have not heard one word, or maybe I missed it, on a phrase called sustainable energy. As I understand it, Puerto Rico today is producing its electricity 55% from oil, 28% from natural gas, 16% from coal, 1% from renewables. Now, unless Puerto Rico's advertising is incorrect, last I heard you were a sunny island. You were an island. There's wind. I do not understand why you are producing electricity from oil and why we are not investing significantly into sustainable energy. I know there are plans underway, but you have huge potential to lead this part of the world. All right, let's get back to my friends on Wall Street here. Mr. Weiss, you indicated that the hedge funds, some of the vulture funds, are buying bonds at 30 to 70%. At a time when children in Puerto Rico are going hungry and schools are being shut down, why should the United States government, or why should these guys be getting back 100% on their investment when they are paying 30 to 70% on the dollar for these bonds?
Senator, as we have said, the debt is unsustainable, and the market knows this. The fact that the highest rated, most senior debt trades at 70 cents is a clear indication that this is no surprise.
What are the interest rates? I don't have a lot of time. What are the interest rates now that these...
The yield on the most highly priced debt security in Puerto Rico is in excess of 11%.
Whoa. So they're getting 11%. They want 11%.
They are receiving
11%, and children in Puerto Rico are going hungry. Somehow that equation does not make a lot of sense to me. I think this is an issue that has to be dealt with. So the first point that I would make, in any serious discussion about this issue, the goal cannot be simply to protect high interest rates going to vulture funds on Wall Street. They are going to have to sit down on the table and take a significant haircut. They made risky investments, and when you make a risky investment, you should not expect to get 100% back on your dollar.
Senator, may I make one point? That 11% is tax exempt. I just wanted to make that point.
All right. So I think let's put that on the table, and that has got to end. My own view is, and I indicated this to the Secretary of the Treasury, Mr. Weiss, I think the Secretary of the Treasury and you should call a meeting with all of the players, including the players in Puerto Rico who are now suffering, representatives of labor unions. When I hear labor reform, usually what that means to me is lower wages and longer hours, all right? But I would like to see all of the players sit down with the vulture funds and work out an agreement that is satisfactory to both sides. Now, in terms of transparency, I have heard, and I don't claim to be an expert on this, but that it is possible that some of the debt was incurred in an unconstitutional way, in violation of Puerto Rico's Constitution. Yes. Who wants to talk to that one? Yes, sir, Governor.
Yes, and we need to audit that.
Do you think that that is a possibility, that some of your debt was unconstitutional?
In that words, if that is a possibility, the answer is yes.
And let me clarify that there's an Attorney General opinion in Puerto Rico providing some support for the interpretation that some of the debt could be issued outside the constitutional requirement. So it's a legal issue, but you might be right, and it's something that should be studied.
Should debt be repaid if, in fact, that debt was incurred in an unconstitutional way?
No.
No?
Who said no? You both say no, sir.
I said no, and in addition to the opinion from the Attorney General that Congressman Pierluisi mentions, the Constitution specifically says that to balance the budget, you're not allowed to issue debt. You're supposed to basically increase taxes. That's what the Puerto Rico Constitution
And we presume that the investors understood that and were familiar with it.
Well, it was certainly disclosed in the official statement. Whether or not they read it is a different question, and that's perhaps an issue to be investigated by the Banking Committee here in the Senate.
Okay. So what I'm hearing, though, from several of you, that if these debts were incurred in a way that was unconstitutional, that perhaps this debt should not have to be repaid.
Yeah, and since the senator raises the issue, or has been raised, the issue of audits, let me say that Congress has the authority. This committee has jurisdiction to require the GAO to do annual audits of the Puerto Rico government and financial transactions and issue recommendations. This committee had legislation before the committee in providing for GAO to oversee or give guidelines and recommendations as to estimates, tax revenue estimates, expense estimates done by the territories. I testified before this committee, and I asked the committee to include Puerto Rico in that legislation. And for some reason, you left Puerto Rico out, and you allowed GAO to advise the other territories, but not Puerto Rico. And now you tell me that our records or financial records are not the types that you would like to see. So what I say is definitely Congress has authority to, it did it with the District of Columbia, and you can do it in a way that respects Puerto Rico's autonomy, and I think it should be done, and GAO could also consider the issue that—
My time has expired.
We're going to try to get one more member in, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here. I want to see if I can try to pull this together. The people of Puerto Rico are in a really lousy position. They have been hit hard by 10 years of recession, and now they're crushed by debt they cannot repay. And ordinarily, a city in this kind of financial trouble would declare bankruptcy, a country would go to the IMF, and in either case, they would work out a reasonable debt reduction and a repayment plan. But Puerto Rico, by American law, cannot do either one of these, and that leaves the 3.5 million American citizens on the island at the mercy of the people who hold Puerto Rico's debt. So who owns Puerto Rico's debt? Many of these owners are so-called vulture funds that wait until a borrower is in trouble, and then they buy the debt at a big discount so they can make a profit even if some of the debt doesn't get repaid. But the vulture funds don't want to negotiate. Instead, what do the vulture funds want? Well, they want Puerto Rico to raise taxes, cut health care, fire teachers, cut pensions, sell off $4 billion worth of government buildings, privatize public ports, close neighborhood schools, and cut support for the University of Puerto Rico, all so that these vulture funds can squeeze out more profits. Now, Mr. Mark Swatch, what would happen to the people of Puerto Rico and the economy of Puerto Rico if they did what the vulture funds are asking for?
Well, it's essentially another round of austerity that would be imposed on the people of Puerto Rico. We already have done pension reform. We have fired government employees. We have cut expenditures. We have raised taxes since 2009. So obviously, what it will do to the economy is make the actual recession or contraction even more acute.
Okay.
So I don't think it's part of the solution.
So it will make things worse
Definitely,
in Puerto Rico.
in my opinion,
Worse
it
for the people, worse for the future
Yes.
of this economy. Mr. Weiss, I understand that the Treasury Department's position is that Congress should pass legislation so that Puerto Rico can force creditors to the negotiating table, the same way any American city or any country can do. I believe that Congress should pass a law. I have co-sponsored such a law, and I will fight for it. But I also understand from your testimony that you've been working with other agencies to guarantee Puerto Rico has access to existing federal programs. You've worked to encourage other agencies to pursue all administrative options. But I want to be clear on this point. Is it your position that Treasury itself has absolutely no power to help the people of Puerto Rico without congressional action?
Thank you for the question. The administration has organized, led by the White House, an interagency effort, and we are part of that. There is a dedicated team at Treasury. There is also a dedicated team at HHS. We have been working closely with the governor, with the legislative leadership.
I'm sorry, just help me out a little bit on what working with means. I just want to understand what Treasury is doing to try to help out in these circumstances.
We have analyzed the finances of Puerto Rico. We are here to say today, with no ambiguity, that there is a liquidity crisis and that there is a fiscal crisis. And it's our strong belief that the most powerful way forward involves broader bankruptcy protection, as you stated, which would allow us to bring creditors to the table who would otherwise have no intention to enter into negotiations.
Ms. Rice, I'll push on Congress to try to pass these bills. But frankly, I think Treasury needs to step up and show more leadership here. I agree with Treasury's recommendations to Congress, but let's face it, in Washington, sometimes things like this that sound good amount to just passing the buck. You know, during the financial crisis, when the banks were in trouble, Treasury did a lot more than just bail them out. Treasury stretched the limits of its authority to make sure that the banks stayed afloat. It helped broker deals between banks. It applied pressure to get parties to accept deals they may not have liked very much. It has done that in multiple other crises as well. And now the people of Puerto Rico are calling. They understand there is no bailout on the table for them, and they are not asking for one. After all, they aren't a giant bank. But they are asking the administration to do what it can to help broker deals, to stand up to the vulture funds that are pushing for a vision that is far at odds with the people of Puerto Rico and with all American citizens. Puerto Rico is not trying to protect its profitability. They just want to make sure that the families of Puerto Rico have a chance to build a future for themselves and their kids. And I urge Treasury to be just as creative in coming up with solutions for Puerto Rico as it was when the big banks called for help.
Senator,
Thank you.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to adjourn. The vote is about to be closed, so we will stand adjourned for about 10 minutes or until members can get back. We are back to order before the committee. We've got a little bit of a reprieve. The second vote is going to begin in about 10 or 15 minutes, so we will continue with the questioning and probably have to wrap it up by about 5 minutes after 12 or continue it depending where we are in the process. With that, we will turn to Senator Hirono from Hawaii.
Thank you very much. Regarding Senator Warren's line of questioning as to the Treasury being able to do more, I would share those sentiments because I think we need to do everything we can besides waiting for the legislation that would help Puerto Rico pass. That may take a while. So I'd like to echo her suggestion and her strong urging to Treasury that you be aggressive and doing what you can. And in fact, I'd like to ask the Governor Padilla, do you think that Treasury is doing all it can to help Puerto Rico in this crisis situation?
Well, Senator, thank you for the question. And I want to be as comprehensive as you have been trying. Yesterday, Treasury and the White House put out a plan to make Puerto Rico succeed. And it's the more comprehensive and ambitious one in my lifetime. I think that since Kennedy, as President Muñoz, as a governor, no one have addressed the issue as President Obama and Treasury yesterday. We can argue, for example, with HHS, that they can fix Medicare right now. But what we cannot allow, Senator, is to let Puerto Rico struggle between the Hill and the White House. Congress arguing that the administration should do more, and the administration arguing that we need to pass legislation. Maybe both are true. But Puerto Rico is in the middle.
Yes. Well, my point is that it may take a while for Congress to act, considering what the circumstances and the environment here is. So short of Congress acting, and yes, I totally agree that Congress should act on the bills that we have before us. But in the meantime, we would want to be assured that the administration is doing everything it can to assist Puerto Rico. I have a question for Mr. Marksach. Am I pronouncing your name? In your testimony, you recommend that the extension of the earned income tax credit to Puerto Rican workers would be a very effective anti-poverty program. It is that pretty much in the U.S. And all of the benefits of the earned income tax credit and promoting work, et cetera. So if implemented today, by the way, forgive me for not knowing, but would we have to pass legislation in order for Puerto Rico to qualify? Yes.
Yes.
So it's yet another thing. Let's say that we did pass it, and if it passed, how long would it take how soon would the benefits of the earned income tax credit accrue so that your economy and your debt situation could be improved?
First of all, it depends when it's implemented, but assuming it's for the
Let's
next tax year, it would be pretty much immediate. I mean, there are dozens of studies here in the United States that demonstrate that this type of refundable credit has a direct impact on consumption and on the welfare of the poorest families, since they basically spend all their income. They have basically no money left over to save. So the impact in the short term could be very significant. But as I mentioned in my testimony, it's only part of the solution. I mean, it will help, you know, it's like a shot in the arm in the short term, but we need to think also about the longer term policies.
Oh, did you want to add something, Governor?
Yes, Senator, just to make my point very clear on the previous question. There's no doubt that congressional action is needed. Not to kick the can. If we want to kick the can a little bit, a few months, maybe a year, but to solve the problem, this is very simple. The ball is right now in Congress court. What we are asking is to throw the ball to our court. I want to solve the issue. We began, we need to finish that job. Right now, ball is in your court. Please, pass it to our. We need to do the job. It's our problem. We need the tools to do our job.
I certainly get the sense of urgency that you have and that we all should share. Governor, in May 2014, you signed legislation that required the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, PREPA, to ensure that the electricity from fossil fuels be generated more efficiently. Have efficiency goals been met as a result of this legislation that you signed?
Let me give you just a little background. When I was sworn in, we produced like 67% of our energy from oil. Now it's 54, as Senator Sanders pointed out. When I was sworn in, energy was at 31 cents per kilowatt hour. Now it's 19. It's cheaper than in Hawaii or in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Puerto Rico is the offshore jurisdiction with cheaper energy in the United States. Still high, 19 cents. But let me tell you why we get there. Did you know that a previous governor took a loan addressing or over GDP liquidity just to reduce the energy for the election period? That was amazing. That was incredible. And that was part of the problem. Yes, we are trying to add more renewables. We already signed for building of 600 megawatts of a peak demand of 3,200 megawatts on renewable. But we need to finish the restructure of PREPA that we already began or we're about to end successfully to allow trust of the financial world to invest. But those are the right facts. Puerto Rico 3 years ago was at 31 cents per kilowatt, is now at 19. And that's a reality of Puerto Rico.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Hawaii can, yes, we share certain common issues relating to reliance on fossil fuels. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam Chair, for keeping this open as well. I want to see if, for a moment, I can take a bit of a longer view with respect to this challenge. And this really goes back to the days when I was the chair of this committee and Senator Murkowski was chair, ranking minority member. And let me direct this question, if I might, to you, Mr. Marswatch, because to me, the central question, if you're going to keep this from happening again, you have to resolve this issue of status. That, to me, is just basic, and I see you're nodding your head yes. So let's kind of walk through a little bit of this. In November of 2012, the Puerto Rican government held a local referendum on Puerto Rico's political future. And we noted back, again, when I was chair, in August of 2013, on that vote, there was no disputing that a majority of the voters in Puerto Rico, 54%, clearly expressed their opposition to continuing the current territorial status. So at that hearing, I expressed my concern that the lack of resolution of Puerto Rico's status not only distracts from addressing these huge challenges, it contributes to them. As the President's Task Force on Puerto Rico's status found, I'll quote here, identifying the most effective means of assisting the Puerto Rican economy depends on resolving the ultimate question, which they called status. So it is still clear that for Puerto Rico to get on top of these issues and really to achieve the full potential that all concerned are interested in, the issues got to be resolved. Puerto Rico must either exercise full self-government as a sovereign nation or achieve equality among the states of the Union. So the Congress's response to the 2012 referendum, Congress responded to it by authorizing and allocating the funds for the first federally sponsored status vote in Puerto Rico's history. So I'm not sure that that's been fully appreciated, but the enactment of this law is, again, one of the important steps to get this resolved. And it's my hope that the government of Puerto Rico will use this funding to conduct a federally sponsored vote. The rejection of the current territory status by the voters of Puerto Rico leaves the Puerto Rico challenge with only two options: statehood under U.S. sovereignty or some form of separate national sovereignty. Once Puerto Rico does hold the vote, the Congress ought to respond in an appropriate fashion to implement the democratic desire of the U.S. citizens of Puerto Rico. So if you might, Mr. Marswatch, tell the committee a bit about how you see this question of political status, in effect, in suspended animation, has harmed the economy of Puerto Rico.
Certainly, it has harmed the economy of Puerto Rico. I'm going to leave the political
Ask you about the economy.
issue. Yeah, but economists are trained basically to deal with situations where they have to analyze and try to optimize a given event within certain restrictions. In the case of Puerto Rico, the restrictions have become overwhelming because precisely of this ambiguous status that we have, that it's called Commonwealth. You know, we're not a sovereign country, we're not a state of the union, we have no authority to negotiate treaties, no access to emergency financing from multilateral institutions, no monetary policy instruments, we have limited fiscal policy tools, nominal representation in Congress, with all due deference to Commissioner here, and the U.S. Supreme Court has determined that it is constitutionally permissible to discriminate against Puerto Rico in the application of federal programs as long as there exists a rational basis for doing so. So if you're trying to deal with an emergency or a crisis like the one we have now, with no monetary tools, limited fiscal policy tools, and all these other political restrictions, it's almost an insoluble problem. So yes, there are certain things we can do in the short term to alleviate the situation, but eventually, if you're going to think over the medium to longer term, you have to solve the underlying issue, which obviously is status.
Okay, I appreciate that point because I understand I missed some of the earlier discussion, and there was, as is the case in this committee, some fairly spirited debate. But what Mr. Marswatch has said, and I know it's not flashy and sensationalistic and will not drive this evening's headlines, but the underlying question, which I feel strongly about, and Mr. Marswatch just confirmed, the underlying question is resolving the issue of status. And if you do not resolve that issue, you're on a glide path for a threat that this could happen again, and no one wants to see that. I have to go back to the floor. I know one of the other witnesses wants to respond, and I apologize for the discourtesy and perhaps...
It's okay. I know you have a busy agenda.
Why don't you just go ahead? Go, please, if you could.
Very briefly.
I apologize for
No. I appreciate your attention always to Puerto Rico, Senator. You're from Oregon, and we are glad that you are studying so much about us. First, this is a crisis that we need to solve now, and I want to highlight that. Second, we can address the issue of status. We need to address the issue of status, but we will not argue that the Illinois fiscal problems are due to an issue of status, or New York, or Detroit, or Orange County. Well, we may say that statehood is a problem for Illinois, but we will not argue that. And I will urge the committee to take a look on the last report of congressional request from the GAO, information on how statehood will potentially affect Puerto Rico.
Let me do this, if I might, because I will also be dealing with these issues along with my colleague, Senator Cantwell, on the Finance Committee, and there are a whole host of measures that come up there as well. Clearly, action needs to be taken to deal with a number of the challenges right away. But what happens in American politics and in American government is people always say, oh, let's respond here in the next 36 hours and we'll call it a day because we got it fixed. What Mr. Marswatch confirmed is essentially what I have been concerned about, is that we could be back dealing with this again unless the issue of status is resolved. And I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. I think your point is certainly well taken. What we want to be able to do is not just address a short-term crisis, which I think it's fair to say, whether it's a humanitarian crisis, as Mr. Weiss has used the terms, or financial crisis, fiscal crisis. We've got a crisis, and several of the proposals I think that the administration is proposing, and I think that you, Governor Padilla, have put out on the table, may deal with us in the short term. But I absolutely concur with what Senator Wyden has said. We don't want to be back here as a committee or as a Congress several years from now in the same situation. We need to be looking to a longer-term solution. And as probably one of the few, maybe I'm the only one, I'll have to check on it, members of the Senate at least, that was born in a territory, I pay keen attention to the situation in Puerto Rico and the issue of status. Right now, what we're trying to do is figure out whether some of these short-term issues short-term proposals are the fix that we need, and I think we've got a lot of work ahead of us. I also want to agree with what Senator Warren raised and what was reinforced by Senator Hirono, that what we're talking about here are proposals that the administration has now put before Congress, and I think we all recognize that Congress sometimes, even in the midst of a crisis, takes a long while to work its magic, if you can describe it as magic. And so everything that the administration can be doing within its toolbox needs to be pursued and considered. I don't know, during the break, Mr. Weiss, if you had an opportunity to get a better handle on some of the numbers that I had asked you about in my questions, but I was able to get some information. Apparently there's an energy analyst out there who has put out this height securities report, is what it's called, and a rough breakdown of the administration's proposal when it comes to the EITC. It's estimated that it would be about $1.5 billion in annual payments, the child tax credit about $850 million. The FMAP to the federal average would be about 2.8, and the ballpark that is estimated, again, and I'm just giving you what I picked up over a BlackBerry in the past half an hour or so, is about $5 billion a year. So if in fact we are in this ballpark, you need to understand that it's going to take Congress a while to work through some of these proposals, and attempting to identify an offset is something that we need to know that the administration is going to be willing to work with us on, because that will be a part of the hang-up here. So it's kind of a broad statement that leads to a response from you, Mr. Weiss, in terms of whether or not there are other administrative actions that you feel can be advanced at this point in time, and if you feel that the the proposal that you've laid out, that the administration has laid out, is somewhere in the ballpark of what this height security report has advanced.
Thank you, Chairman Murkowski. And I'd like to address the very fair comments made by Senators Hirono and Warren as well. Let me assure this committee that Treasury and the broader administration will apply all of its efforts and all of our creativity and all of our resources to the resolution of this financial crisis, just as we have in past crises, and we will leave no stone unturned. And so we recognize that the administration has a role to play alongside Congress in crafting these proposals and in making sure that Puerto Rico sees through this crisis and gets back on a path to growth. As to the costs of our proposals, I'd like to highlight that bankruptcy involves no federal funds. It costs nothing to the federal government. It is merely a means of bringing creditors to the table in order to achieve an orderly restructuring of liabilities. As to health care and the EITC, let me emphasize that we have introduced these two as principles, not as detailed legislation, and we would look forward to working with you and your staff and other members of Congress as to how to bring this to reality in a fiscally responsible way. Okay. We understand that this is a fiscally constrained environment, but at the same time, I need to highlight 1.6 million American citizens in Puerto Rico out of the 3.5 million population depend on Medicaid, and it is the lack of Medicaid that is also prompting some of them to leave the island.
Understood. And I don't mean to cut you off, but I am going to have to run to this vote because it's wrapping up also. Sure. But I'm also very cognizant of what this committee's jurisdiction is, and as important as the Medicaid piece is, I know that other committees are going to be looking to address that. I wanted to ask a very quick question of Mr. Marswatch, if I may, because there's been a lot of discussion back and forth about the bondholders and gaining advantage and being paid 100%. Do you happen to have any idea what percent of the bondholders are actually Puerto Ricans? I have to imagine that they're not all outsiders who have no interest in what happens to Puerto Rico.
You're right about that. The number seems to change every week, I guess, but the latest figure we have heard is between 25 and 30% of all outstanding bonded debt. It's held by either Puerto Rico institutions or Puerto Rico investors. However, I have no way of verifying that. You know, this is the number that has been put out by some investment banks, but I personally don't have, I mean, I cannot vouch for the validity of that, but that's the number that's been put out.
It's the same number that we have, Chairwoman.
And Chairman, I'd like to contribute the best estimates that my office has obtained for the EITC, full application of EITC in Puerto Rico is roughly $500 million. So it's $500 million, not this number that you quoted from some other source. Well, and child tax credit, full application of the child tax credit program, the number we have is roughly 150. $50 million. So, and I agree with you. The challenge would be to identify an offset, but those are the best numbers I can provide you.
Well, and I think part of what we are dealing with today, the governor released his proposal last week. The administration released their proposal. This is all new. It's out there on the table. There's a lot of assessment, a lot of analysis. There's going to be a lot of numbers going back and forth. This is why, at the end of the day, it really helps to understand what it is that we are dealing with. What are the true numbers? So whether it's what we have requested from the governor, and he's indicated we're going to see in the next couple of weeks, at least with the 2014 audited report, that's going to be important. It's going to be important that Treasury be able to rely on this. We need to have some keen understanding. I don't think that there's any disagreement that it's bad, but we also need to understand, again, if it's this bad, what are the costs that are associated?
Madam Chairman,
Mr.
if I may,
Rosbacher?
in my extended written remarks that I submitted to the committee, I did take the time to look at the audits we do have from 2013 all the way back to 1998 and calculate what's called the primary balance for Puerto Rico. That's it. What that means in non-technical terms is how much money you have left before paying interest on your debt. And it's clear that at least, during that period between 1998 and 2013, Puerto Rico ran a primary deficit. That is, we had a deficit before even paying the debt, the interest on our debt. So that essentially means that we are in a classic debt trap, what economists call a debt trap. You have to keep borrowing just to pay off the interest on outstanding debt. And when that game of financial musical chairs stops, you really cannot continue. And I think we have reached that point. I do not have the numbers for 2014, but I did take the effort to, as I said, calculate this primary deficit for Puerto Rico, and it's submitted in the longer statement that I presented to the committee.
And we will all be looking at this, and it will not just be this committee, of course. It will be the other committees of jurisdiction, judiciary, and finance. Again, I apologize that we're not able to give more time to this. Obviously, as I was speaking with Senator Cantwell, we could have continued this hearing well into the afternoon to probe deeper into it. But I appreciate all of you coming this morning and presenting the positions. We have much work to do. I think there is agreement that we must be working together to address the situation in Puerto Rico, not only for the short term, which is very precarious, but for the longer term as well. So much before the committee. Thank you all, and we stand
Thank you,
adjourned.
Chairwoman.